She would sit on that park bench for nearly 3 hours, clutching a pink backpack and watching strangers pass, believing every passing minute that her father would come back, until a lone Hells Angels biker noticed the one thing no one else did. A little girl who had been forgotten. 8-year-old Lily Monroe had been told to wait by the playground at Willow Creek Park on the edge of Topeka, Kansas, just until her dad finished a quick errand. And because Lily was the kind of child who followed rules carefully, she stayed exactly where he left her, sitting upright on the weathered bench near the swing set, feet dangling above the gravel, pink sneakers tapping together in a nervous rhythm she didn't realize she was making. It was late Saturday afternoon in early September, the kind of day where summer hadn't quite let go yet. The sun still warm, but the breeze carrying the first hint of fall, and families moved through the park in loose clusters. Parents calling after children, couples walking dogs, teenagers laughing too loudly. Yet none of them noticed Lily sitting alone because from a distance, she looked like she belonged to someone who would return any moment. At first, Lily counted time the way kids do, by songs in her head, by how many times the clouds drifted across the sun, by how long she could stare at the ground before her eyes started to sting. She replayed her father's voice over and over. "Don't move, I'll be right back," and told herself that adults didn't forget things like children, that forgetting a child wasn't something that really happened outside of bad dreams or stories on the news her mom never let her watch. An hour passed, then another, and Lily's stomach started to ache with hunger. But she didn't get up to look for help because her mom had taught her one rule above all others. If you get lost, stay put. Make it easier to be found. The problem was, Lily didn't feel lost. She felt erased. She watched the sun slide lower, shadows stretching long across the grass. And when a family packed up a picnic blanket not far from her bench, she almost stood up to ask if they had seen her dad. But the words tangled in her throat, and she sat back down, cheeks burning with embarrassment she didn't understand. She wondered if she had done something wrong earlier, talked too much in the car, complained about the heat, asked one too many questions, and whether that somehow explained why the space beside her on the bench remained empty. By the time a black motorcycle rolled slowly along the street bordering the park, Lily had stopped looking up every time footsteps passed and instead stared at the dirt between her shoes, tracing shapes with the toe of her sneaker and pretending she was invisible, because pretending made the waiting hurt a little less. The motorcycle cut its engine near the curb, the sound sudden and loud enough that Lily flinched, but she didn't look up right away. The rider removed his helmet and stood there for a moment, scanning the park the way people do when they're not really looking for anything, until his gaze landed on her. Jack Rook Halvorsen was 47 years old, tall and broad with a road-worn face, his black vest heavy with patches that marked decades of riding and a life most people judge before understanding. And he had stopped only because his hands were cramping from the highway, and he needed a minute before continuing the long ride back toward Oklahoma City. He noticed Lily not because she was crying or calling out, but because she wasn't doing either. Children didn't sit that still unless something was wrong. Rook walked closer, boots crunching softly on the path, and when Lily finally looked up, her eyes were red-rimmed and tired in a way that made his chest tighten. He kept his voice low, careful. "Hey there, kid. You okay?" Lily nodded automatically, the reflexive answer of a child who didn't want to be trouble, but she didn't smile, didn't ask who he was, didn't do any of the things kids usually did when approached by a stranger. Rook sat on the opposite end of the bench, leaving space between them, and pulled a bottle of water from his saddlebag, setting it on the bench without pushing it toward her. "You waiting on someone?" he asked. Lily swallowed. "My dad," she said quietly. "He told me to wait here." Rook glanced around the park again, more deliberately this time, noting the thinning crowd, the long shadows, the way evening was starting to settle in. "How long ago did he leave?" Lily hesitated, then shrugged. The sun was higher. That answer hit harder than any number could have. Rook nodded slowly, keeping his face neutral even as anger flared beneath his calm, and asked, "Do you know where he went?" Lily shook her head. "He said he'd be right back." There it was, the phrase adults used when they didn't realize how long right back could feel to a child. Rook introduced himself, told her she didn't have to talk if she didn't want to, and waited in silence, because sometimes silence was safer than questions. After a moment, Lily whispered, "Did I do something bad?" The question broke something open in him, because it wasn't the first time he'd heard it from someone too young to be carrying that kind of doubt. "No," he said firmly. "You didn't do anything wrong." Lily stared at her hands. "He forgot me," she said, not accusing, just stating a fact the way kids do when they finally accept something painful. Rook felt the weight of that sentence settle heavy and cold in his chest, because he knew exactly what it meant to be forgotten, to be left behind while the world kept moving, and he made a decision in that moment that would change both their lives. He wasn't going to walk away. The first thing Jack Rook Halvorsen did after Lily said he forgot me was look at his watch, not because the time mattered anymore, but because it told him how long a child had been invisible in plain sight. And when he realized she had likely been sitting there for close to 3 hours, something dark and protective settled in his chest and refused to move. He kept his voice steady as he asked simple questions. Did she have a phone? Did she know any numbers by heart? Had her dad said where he was going? And with every small, careful answer Lily gave, the picture became clearer and worse. Her phone was in the car. She didn't know the number because she always just tapped Dad. And he had driven them to the park during a weekend visit because it was cheaper than a movie. Rook listened without interrupting, the way he'd learned to do over decades of riding with men who carried their own quiet damage. And when Lily finally went silent, he said, "Okay, here's what's going to happen. You're not in trouble, and you're not alone anymore." He stood then, pulled out his phone, and called 911, reporting a child left unattended at Willow Creek Park, giving Lily's name, age, and what little information she had about her father, while Lily watched him with the intense focus of someone clinging to the only solid thing in reach. While they waited, Rook offered her the water and a granola bar from his saddleback, and she accepted after a moment, eating slowly like she wasn't sure she was allowed to be hungry. When the police cruiser arrived, lights flashing softly rather than urgently, Lily stiffened, fear flickering across her face, and Rook immediately crouched beside her, saying, "They're here to help. Same as me." The officer, a middle-aged woman with tired eyes and a gentle voice, knelt to Lily's level and spoke to her like a person, not a problem, while another officer took Rook aside to get his statement, eyeing the black vest and patches that marked his affiliation with the Hells Angels, but saying nothing about it beyond a neutral nod. It took less than 20 minutes to locate Lily's father by vehicle registration, and when the officer returned with her phone pressed to her chest, Lily didn't look relieved. She looked resigned. "He didn't know I wasn't there," she said before anyone could explain. The officer confirmed it quietly. He had driven more than 70 miles before stopping for gas and realizing Lily wasn't in the back seat, assuming she'd gone to the restroom later or fallen asleep. A chain of assumptions that landed like blows each time they were spoken aloud. Lily stared at the ground as if she'd expected exactly that answer, and Rook felt his jaw tighten as he fought the urge to say something that would only make things harder for her. The officers explained that the father was turning around, but it would be at least an hour and a half before he arrived. And when they asked Lily how she felt about waiting, she hesitated just long enough to reveal the truth before saying, "Okay," because that was what she had learned to say when adults disappointed her. While paperwork was filled out and calls were made to child services, Rook stayed with her on the bench, talking about nothing important. Motorcycles, road trips, the way the wind felt when you went fast enough. And slowly, Lily's shoulders lowered, the tension easing just a little. When the officer finally reached Lily's mother, Rachel Monroe, in Oklahoma City, the sound that came through the phone was a sharp intake of breath followed by a sob that made Lily's eyes fill instantly. Rook handed her the phone, and Lily pressed it to her ear like it was something fragile and precious, whispering, "Mom?" and then breaking apart completely as all the fear she'd held back finally spilled out. Rook stepped away to give them privacy, staring out at the darkening park, at the empty swings moving slightly in the breeze, thinking about how close this had come to being another story with a worse ending. When Lily handed the phone back, her eyes were swollen but brighter somehow, steadier. Rachel wanted to speak to him, her voice shaking with gratitude and anger tangled together. And when she heard he was already headed toward Oklahoma City, she asked the question that surprised everyone, including herself. "Could you bring her to me?" The officers exchanged looks, procedures and protocols ticking through their minds, and Rook said simply, "If it's allowed, I will." What followed was a flurry of checks, IDs, background verification, phone calls to supervisors. And through it all, Lily watched him with an expression that hovered between hope and disbelief, like she didn't quite trust good things to last. When the approval finally came, when the officer explained that Lily would ride with Rook directly to her mother under supervision and documentation, Lily didn't cheer or smile widely. She just let out a long breath she'd been holding all day. A spare child-size helmet was found in a patrol car, a little too big but safe, and as Rook helped her put it on, she looked up at him and asked, "You won't forget me, right?" The question hit harder than anything else that day, and Rook met her gaze and said, without hesitation, "No, I won't." As Lily climbed onto the motorcycle, small hands gripping the sides of his jacket, Rook felt the weight of responsibility settle heavy but right. And when he started the engine and pulled away from the park where she had been forgotten, he didn't look back, because he already knew this ride wasn't just about getting her home. It was about making sure she understood that being left behind by one person did not mean she was unworthy of being carried forward by another. They rode through the night, the highway unwinding beneath them like a promise being slowly kept. Lily pressed close against Jack Rook Halvorson's back, her small hands gripping the thick leather of his vest as if it were the only solid thing left in the world, and for a while neither of them spoke because some moments didn't need words to exist. Rook kept the speed steady and conservative, checking his mirrors more than necessary, hyper-aware of the quiet weight behind him, while Lily gradually relaxed, the tight fear that had locked her muscles all afternoon easing with every mile that carried her farther away from the bench where she'd been forgotten. They stopped once at a brightly lit gas station just over the state line, where Rook bought her a hot chocolate and a sandwich, and Lily smiled shyly, as if she wasn't sure she was allowed to enjoy anything yet. But when she took the first sip and the warmth spread through her, she said softly, "This is nice," and Rook nodded like that mattered more than she could know. Back on the road, the stars came out in full force, and Lily rested her helmeted head against his back, the vibration of the engine humming through her bones in a way that felt oddly comforting. And when she finally fell asleep, Rook felt it immediately, adjusting his posture without thinking, the way you do when you're carrying something fragile and precious. Just after midnight, the lights of Oklahoma City rose up out of the darkness, and Rook's chest tightened as he spotted a lone figure standing under a street lamp in front of a small apartment complex, pacing back and forth, phone clutched in her hand like a lifeline. Rachel Monroe saw the motorcycle before it fully turned onto the street and started running. And Lily woke at the sound of her own name being shouted with a mix of relief and desperation that cut straight through the night. Rook barely had time to stop before Lily was off the bike, helmet forgotten, sprinting forward as her mother dropped to her knees and caught her, holding her so tightly it looked like she was afraid Lily might disappear again if she let go. They cried together there on the pavement, mother and daughter clinging to each other, while Rook stood a few steps back, suddenly aware of how quiet the world had become. When Rachel finally looked up at him, her face streaked with tears, she walked over and hugged him without asking, a kind of hug that carried words too big to say out loud. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice breaking. "Thank you for seeing her." Rook nodded, unsure what to do with the tightness in his throat. "She did everything right," he said. She waited. Lily tugged at his vest then, looking up at him with wide, serious eyes. "You didn't forget me," she said, not as a question but as a realization, and Rook felt something settle in his chest that he hadn't known was missing. They talked for a few minutes longer, about school, about visits, about how sometimes adults made mistakes that kids shouldn't have to pay for. And before Rook left, Lily wrapped her arms around him again and said, "Will you come back?" He smiled down at her. "If you want me to." She nodded hard. "I want you to." 3 months later, Rook rode back into Oklahoma City not because of a crisis, but because Lily had insisted he come to her 9th birthday. And when she ran to show him the cake her mom had baked and introduced him proudly to her friends as the biker who brought me home, Rook realized that the story of that night had already changed in her mind, from abandonment to rescue, from forgetting to being remembered. The custody arrangement shifted quietly after that, supervised visits replacing long drives, and Lily seemed lighter somehow, steadier, knowing there was more than one adult in the world who would show up for her. Every August now, Rook takes the long way home and stops by a small park with a bench near the swings, sits for a while, and drinks a soda as the sun moves across the sky, thinking about how close one little girl came to believing she didn't matter. He rides with the Hell's Angels patch on his back, knowing full well what people assume when they see it, and carrying the quiet truth that sometimes the people who look the hardest on the outside are the ones who notice when a child has been left behind. Lily doesn't say her dad forgot her anymore. She says someone else remembered, and that made all the difference.